So, Alex, thanks for being here with me today. We're talking about the ending of your winter season, your winter RSV season, I think. How was it? How was this winter in the US?
Well, this winter was a very typical winter, Sebastián, and that's kind of in line with what we've had in the previous few years with COVID. As you know, from your own data that has been spread all over the world with the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, we essentially did not see RSV or influenza or human metapneumovirus for about 2 years. And then in the summer of last year, we started to see respiratory viruses that we had never seen in the summer. And it was a slow ramp up into the winter. And the winter was very hard. We had quite a few cases of severe RSV. And it's almost as if all those patients that had been spared from those infections in the previous 2 years all came together. So you have all these children, with respiratory comorbidities and prematurity that became very sick from influenza, human metapneumovirus, enterovirus, and respiratory syncytial virus. So we had a very busy season. I was a little concerned. Our fellows train in critical care for 3 years.
Yeah.
And there is a whole generation that for an entire 2 years did not manage a single critical RSV patient. But then on the third year, they got to see what it's all about.
They had fun.
They sure did. I mean, there are sick patients that are challenging, but that's what we love to do, as so do you.
Okay, so in case people listen to this uh, doesn't know yet, but you are the chief of the critical care division of pediatric intensive care in Duke University, the Duke Hospital, there in Durham. I had the pleasure and the honor to visit your team. But the interesting thing is, how was, if you could uh, try to elaborate, how did you end there? I mean, you have Latin roots, you are Brazilian, so you were born pretty close from my home here in Montevideo, right? So,
That is
if
right.
you could give a summary to the audience, what was your journey, your professional journey from Brazil to leading one of the cutting edge PQs in the US?
Well, how much time do you have? So
The time you
it's
want.
a long journey, Sebastián. It's I am I got into medicine as a child in my head. I knew I wanted to be a physician as soon as I realized I couldn't be an astronaut in Brazil. The Brazilian space program was not very robust.
Those were
So
your two
probably
main options.
those were
Whether
my two main options, and an astronaut was number one by a long shot.
okay.
But by the age of 5 or 6, I realized that that was probably not going to happen, since no one had ever flown a rocket in Brazil. So my parents were physicians, and so I grew up in a medical family. I grew up watching them just love what they did, and my father, who was a neonatologist, working very long hours, but with great pleasure. And I realized there was nothing else I would want to do than be part of that. The difficulty is that both my parents were professors at our top regional medical school, and when I uh, decided that I was going to really go into medicine, you have to take an entrance exam, and if you score high enough, then you get into this medical school, which is essentially a free ride. You don't pay any tuition to be there, if you get into this particular school, but it's highly competitive, and I was fortunate enough to score high enough to get in. And it became very clear to me throughout my medical school that it was very difficult to separate what were my accomplishments and what were the accomplishments of my parents. My name is not a common Brazilian last name. There's probably 2 or 3 people with the same last name I have in my hometown of about 2 million people. So when you go through school with the last name that I have, the first question someone asks is, well, are you the son of Dr. So-and-so? And then immediately, it gets attached to you that what you are accomplishing is because of your parents and not because of you. So I realized that I needed to do something different, and I decided somewhere halfway through medical school that I needed to go to a place where no one knew them, and just to see if I could make it on my own. And the original plan was to come to the United States, get into residency, go into a neonatology fellowship, and then go back to Brazil.
In a way, was in your mind from the beginning.
Pediatrics was from the beginning. In fact, that remains to this day. If I did not work in the field of pediatrics, I would not have been in medicine. I would probably have been in construction, which also fascinates me. But building something is very enticing to me. I had no desire to work with adults and especially people whose, unfortunately, nowadays, who a lot of their problems come from their own lifestyle choices and behaviors, whereas children tend to be extremely resilient and also optimistic because they have a whole future ahead of them. So it's very attractive to me to do that. So I studied hard during medical school and took the necessary exams to apply for residency in the United States. And I came here on one particular vacation from my medical school for 2 weeks and did about 12 interviews. It was a busy couple of weeks for me. And at the end of that period, I had offers to join some good programs, and I chose one that had all the attributes that I was looking for, and that was the Children's Hospital of Michigan. It was a major children's hospital at the time. So I did,
your plan was to get the medical degree in Rio Grande do Sul, right, in Porto Alegre, and then
Porto Alegre, yes,
go to the US. Was because anything in particular to go to the US? Did you plan it in advance, specific that place, or you consider, for example, Europe? I mean, in your mind was outside Latin America, far away from Brazil.
Yeah, it was any place but to stay in Brazil. And again, I could have stayed and it would have been probably wonderful. But, the mind of a young man, you make up your mind and you need to do things. And I considered very briefly, going to Europe or Australia. But, I knew it was going to be an English-speaking country. And the problem is that Canada, the United Kingdom, and countries that were previous colonies or had influence from England, the system is very different than that in the United States. In the United States, it's a very meritorious system, and if you study hard enough and you work hard enough, you will succeed. Whereas the British system, sometimes it's a very pyramidal system where you might work many, many, many years. And especially if you are not a natural-born citizen, it might be difficult to break through those barriers.
Closer environment, professional environment in a way, Europe than the US.
It's also one that I did not understand well. I don't like to play a game for which I do not know the rules. And the rules in the United States were very, very clear. So it was the natural choice for me.
How was the process as a young fellow to go to the US? I mean, you wanted to do that. Of course, it was in your mind. But was it any time during the first years, in particular, that you had reminiscence about your roots? Did you consider
Oh,
to go back to Brazil?
Sam, this is
I mean, language.
I did
You're
I didn't
almost
realize.
you speak so fluently English. English is almost natural to you, but language can be a barrier for many.
Well,
Talk about that.
there's a lot to unpack there, and
Yeah.
I didn't realize that we were going to be talking about this today, which is the fun thing about speaking with a good friend. So let's talk about the language first.
Yeah.
Okay, déjame darte un ejemplo. Okay. Puedo entender casi todo lo que lo dices, pero por supuesto hablo español con mucho acento. Okay.
No, pero se entiende perfecto.
Ah, por supuesto. Ho lo stesso tipo di problema quando provo a comunicare in italiano.
Yeah.
Mas o mais constrangedor é que eu também falo português com sotaque. So I speak four languages, or understand four languages, and I do
Yeah.
not speak a single one of them well. Okay, I have an accent in Spanish, in Italian, in Portuguese, and in English, and that's just who I am. It's embarrassing, but I go back to Brazil now, and my colleagues, will say, "Well, you talk funny. What's up with that?" And I'll say, "Well, I haven't spoken Portuguese in 30 years, but I'll always have an accent in every language I speak." So that's besides the point. But coming here, Sebastián, once you make the decision to leave, it was definitely way harder than I thought it was going to be. And I'll give you an example. I got into medical school at a very early age. I started medical school at the age of 16, and which means that I was done when I was 21, 22, and then came to the U.S. And my family was a middle class family, and they certainly we lived a comfortable life, but we didn't have a lot of money, and at least in my mind, I could not ask my family to help support me. So the only way that I could take this leap was if I could make this on my own. So once I got accepted into a residency program, I had to figure out how I was going to make the finances work. And that was a complicated part of it, because as a 22-year-old, you don't have a lot of money, but I had a couple of things. I had a used car that it was gifted to me during medical school, and I had a saxophone. I was a musician during medical school, and I played in a jazz band and a rock, pop, funk band. Now there is a very well-known Brazilian musician called Armandinho, and Armandinho plays it's like a reggae fusion Brazilian music, and he's a very successful artist. But in our young days, I was the saxophone player for his band, and we played shows regionally. So in any event, I had my two prized possessions were this used car and my saxophone. So what I did is I sold both of them to raise money to come to the U.S. And I had probably about 3 months of funds to make it here. So
what's like a one-shot thing?
It was a one-shot thing. So I had to come in and rent an apartment and buy a cheap car and try to get some furniture and then start working. And that was just the right time. But once you do that, you realize that there is no other path. You have to push forward, because I certainly was not going to go back home with my tail between my legs. I was definitely going to have to make it. So but what that means is that you come from an environment where you're a good student, you score in the top 1% of exams, and we're in the top 10 of your medical school, and then you come to a place where everyone is exceptionally intelligent, and they know the system way better than you do. So I had a lot of catching up to do, and I saw myself in a position that I was not very accustomed to, which is to be someone who doesn't understand the language with the nuances that I needed to understand, that doesn't know everything I need to know, and I'm trying to absorb all this knowledge while trying to make up for this deficit. So it was an incredibly hard first couple of years, and I remember I'm not a particularly emotional person, but I remember waking up very early in the morning, going to the hospital, working all day, staying there late because it took me longer to do things, studying, coming back home around 11 o'clock or so, then trying to work on my English by watching certain television programs and studying, and then you sleep for 3-4 hours, then you go back, and the time you were awake, you were just crushed because life is happening as you knew it in Brazil, and you were trying to carve this new path. So I remember just crying, compulsively every day for months, because I said, "What have I done?" But then, if you really want it, and if you get past that, then not only things start to seem a little bit more natural, but you have put so much work into it that my mentality was, if my American colleagues are giving 100%, I have to give 110%.
Yeah.
And over time, by the second or third year, you put yourself in a position of equivalence or some time of an advantage. So by the time I was done with my second year, and I had one more year of residency, I was asked to be chief resident, which is a prestigious position for a resident, let alone one who is not from here. And it was during that period of time that I met the man who I think is responsible for me being an intensivist. And that is a professor by the name of Ashok Sarnaik. Dr. Sarnaik was the chief of critical care medicine at the Children's Hospital of Michigan, and an incredible man, just one of the smartest individuals I've ever met. And he introduced me to Brad Furman, who was a visiting professor there. And so I got to spend time with him for a day, giving him tours of the hospital and case discussions and so on. And by the time he left that visiting professorship of 2 days, he had a new fellow and I had a new place to go. And, so the next 3 years of my life were going with Brad Furman from Pittsburgh to Buffalo, New York, where he started a very good training program. So I was one of his first few fellows, and he trained me exceptionally well. I'm forever grateful to Dr. Sarnaik and Dr. Furman for just making me who I am.
And what was the breaking point when you decide to go to critical care? Was that person? Was it that colleague? I mean, we are humans, and in humans, friends and mentors are key.
I think
so you found your mentor. And you had
but it was not just that.
Later on, I wanted to talk about this book. How did you manage to edit this monstrous, a big book? And you were trained by the original Furman. I mean, the very same Furman who wrote the first edition with Zimmerman, right? So
correct.
How important was that the breaking point in your odyssey in the US to try to find what specialty where you will be focusing during your almost entire academic life?
Yeah, so I think there was a constellation of factors. So there was not one single point, but I'll give you 2 examples. One is that I love neonatology. Neonatology throughout medical school, I always gravitated to it, and it validated the emotions that my father imparted on me as far as this is a great specialty. And in Brazil, neonatology in the 80s was mostly late 80s and early 90s was mostly a specialty that took care of term babies with sepsis, meconium aspiration, pulmonary hypertension, and mildly to moderately premature children. Then I came to the US. Well, there were some premature babies, but they certainly were not 25, 24 weekers. And then I came to the United States, and yes, there were some of those term and meconium aspiration syndrome patients, but it was an era that was particularly tough, I think. And it was an era where in vitro fertilization was really growing in the US, but surfactant was really not yet available or widely available. There were some experimental uses of surfactant. Certainly nitric oxide was experimentally used as well. So you can imagine a world where in vitro fertilization is exploding, and you have patients that are now, or women who are now delivering babies at 28, 26, 25 weeks gestation, multiple gestations, syndromic gestations, and those patients really occupied the neonatal ICU and certainly took a lot of the effort of the neonatologists at the time. And that was really not attractive to me as much as the type of neonatology I had been exposed to in Brazil. So that was one thing which made me question if that was really what I wanted to do. But then I came across critical care and wonderful examples of mentorship with Dr. Ashok Sarnaik and his team, and also realizing that I could do critical care and cover the entire spectrum of critical illness, from neonates all the way to young adults.
Yeah.
And that was very attractive to me. So it was a combination of that. And then when I was about to finish my residency, I had that mentality that there were a couple of programs in the United States that I thought were outstanding, and that's the view of someone who looks at this from the outside. So as a Brazilian, I always heard about Johns Hopkins University because of Mark Rogers, and I always heard about Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard University. So those were the two places where I knew that I wanted to be a fellow at. And I went through my interviews, and it just so happened that the year before I was due to start fellowship, Dr. Mark Rogers was stepping down. And there was some level of uncertainty. And of course, Johns Hopkins always lands on their feet, and they selected an extraordinary leader in Dr. Nichols. But there was some uncertainty in my mind as to what the future was going to bring once Dr. Rogers retired. And then at Boston Children's, I interviewed there, and I didn't really feel good about my interview. And I think it started with, it was a very cold, snowy day. And as I'm walking to the hospital in my suit, I had a spectacular fall because I slid on the ice and just fell flat on my back. So that kind of set the tone for the day. But most importantly, after I met Brad Furman, I immediately realized this is the person that is going to take me there. And we had a relationship that
Why?
was
It's
very
interesting
much
that what you're
mentee.
telling. I mean, what made him so special in that interview?
Well, it wasn't even during the interview. It was, I don't know, sometimes in life, things happen and I can't really explain, but it's just the right time and everything aligns. I'll give you an example. As chief resident, one of my duties was to come into the hospital around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And we would do sign out with the team that had been on overnight. So there were 3 teams, and they will come in and present. They will just run the list of cases that they admitted the night before, and they will also ask questions about management and so on, things that couldn't wait until 8 o'clock for rounds when they were round with their attendings. And the job of the chief resident was to take one of those cases, one I found most interesting, or they had a teaching point, select that case, turn it around, and at 7:30 a.m., present this case in the big morning report. So the resident that was chosen that admitted the case will present a case, and my job and of my co-chief resident was to entertain the audience in a Socratic way of asking questions and making teaching points on a case you had never seen before, and you came in cold. So you had to be really, on your feet. And I remember this day we had picked a case of someone who came in respiratory distress and developed respiratory failure. It was a peculiar case. And I noticed there were a couple of people I did not recognize in the room. I thought it was a good morning report. Later, I came to find out that the visitor was Dr. Furman, And he had asked Dr. Sarnaik, well, who's this guy, discussing this case, and what is he going to do? And then Dr. Sarnaik told him, well, he's one of our chief residents, and he's going to critical care. So, Brad already, had it in his mind that, okay, well, this is a young resident who's looking for a critical care job. And then, to me, what really made the difference is it was incredible. I mean, he gave a talk that to me is a masterpiece, and I have that talk on tape. I felt so strongly about it that it was a grand rounds presentation to a packed auditorium. And Brad Furman, as you may or may not know, is one of the pioneers of liquid breathing. So the perfluorochemical associated gas exchange, as he used to call it back there, or partial liquid ventilation. And it was incredibly fascinating to me. And I said, well, I want to be part of this. I want to understand this better. But what was striking to me is just how humble he was. I mean, this is a man who he was in the room when the specialty was created. I mean, he's one of the original 7
The
critical care
founding
physicians.
fathers, one of the founding
He's a
fathers.
founding father, one of the founding fathers. He's, it's an interesting story too. But so this is a man who is at the apex of his career. But his grand rounds presentation was always, this is not what I did. He would say, and this is what happens with this experiment that my colleague so-and-so and I worked on. And then he will say, well, and these are data from my fellow so-and-so. And this is an experiment that my other fellow present. So he was incredibly generous with the attribution of the work, when we all knew that he is actually the engine that drove all of that. He secured the funding. He created the labs. He mentored each one of those research projects, but yet he's giving grace to everyone around him. And I remember thinking that this topic is so fascinating, and this man is so incredibly intelligent, that if he would have me, I'm ready to move and spend the next 3 years with him. So that's exactly what I did. And I went through Choose also of Buffalo, and joined his team as a fellow, and that is the best job someone can ever have.
Alex, how was the process of becoming you the leader of a team? I mean, you didn't enter to the construction business in the US, but you are a team builder in a way. You lead this book. I mean, editorial stuff is in a way really hard teamwork, handling with top academics of our field. But you also have led many teams in the PICU. So I guess listening to you, that he was the mentor of about thinking more about the we than the me. So how was the process of becoming you the leader to a team, and what are your advice in general for those in charge of complex teams which handle really complex patients, as you are doing currently in Duke?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've ever organized my thoughts around that question. It's a very important question, and I'm sure there's an answer, for it. So I'll do my best. I think it starts with your personal core. So you need to have a certain foundation of what your professional ethical compass is. You also benefit from being molded by the people around you and people who take risks on you. Dr. Furman took a major risk on me. I mean, he could have chosen any fellow, he could, but he decided, he saw something in me that maybe I didn't see myself. But at the same time, I am now surrounded by, this environment where I can see what he does. And in the early days, I had 2 or 3 mentors, and it was Dr. Sarnaik and Dr. Steinhorn and Dr. Furman. first of all, it took me a long time to be able to call them by their first names. Up to a few years ago, it was always, Dr. Furman. So you learn by their positive example. But no individual is perfect. So you also learn a lot about, I can see that perhaps this is not the best way of doing this. And so I've learned just as much from everyone's successes and my own, but also from mistakes. And you have to learn that. But after I finished my fellowship, I was offered a position at the State University of New York to work with Brad, which was a dream come true, because that allowed me to stay in the United States through a national interest waiver exception, because the United States would want me to go back to Brazil after my training, and the university and the state of New York were able to make a deal to allow me to stay in the U.S. So I stayed in Buffalo for a total of 9 or 10 years. And then, I moved to South Texas, where it was a different model. And it was something that, I enjoyed very much while I was doing it, but it was not necessarily the program building job that I eventually had. So a few years into my tenure in Texas, I was contacted by a program in Indiana, Riley Hospital for Children in Indianapolis, and they were looking for a cardiac intensivist to create their organize their cardiac critical care program. They had an excellent surgical cardiac program, and they had a good ICU, but they did not have a dedicated cardiac program. So I was going to be the first cardiac intensivist there.
So you were already involved in the care of cardiac heart disease, pediatric heart disease.
Yes. So Brad Furman is a multi-talented man, and he came into critical care through pediatrics, neonatology, and cardiology. And then he became an intensivist. So by training with him, I had a very robust training in pediatric cardiology as well. And then, my job in Texas, a great majority of the workload was in cardiac critical care. So it was the early ages of the specialty, and if you did a lot of cardiac critical care, you could call yourself a cardiac intensivist. So nobody thought it was odd that I was moving to Indiana to build a critical care program. But what was attractive to me was that I was going to be the first one there, and I could do it however I wanted to do. So you always think, when you are in a program that, well, if I could control this is how I would do it, and it would be different than how it's been done. Well, now I had the chance to do it, and really prove to myself and to others that my ideas were actually worthwhile or would work. Now that takes an incredible amount of hard work, especially if you were the first one, because I came in and I was the only cardiac intensivist, and there were a couple of colleagues that will help me here and there, so that I could go home one day and sleep.
You pick your team. I mean,
exactly. So it's just like building, a good football team. You can't have all Ronaldos. You have to have people playing different positions, and so I could hand select people who were already there and people that I eventually recruited from the outside, and we went from being by myself to being 2 and 3 and 4. And that program, by the time I left, was in very solid ground, and is now one of the top 10 programs in the country. It gave me great pleasure to see that program go from a disorganized critical care, cardiac critical care program to, again, one of the top 10 programs in the country. And I love taking care of patients, and I also love creating something that is way bigger than all of us involved, and that is how systems will work. And my style of doing this, which is not for everyone, is very different than, for instance, what you see in industry or even in medicine sometimes. You can have someone who is, the CEO of Coca-Cola, and he's leading this multi-billion-dollar company. And then, he decides that he's going to retire, and then IBM comes and say, hey, we want you to come out of retirement and come work for us. And this guy has spent his entire life working with Coca-Cola, but now he can lead IBM. So because he's a leader or she's a leader. And I admire people who can do that, because I am certain that they know nothing about soft drinks or computers, but they know about how to motivate people and how to run a team. I can't do that. I do not have that talent. So in order for me to lead, I have to lead by example. So the only way I know how to lead is to insert myself into clinical operation and the research operation and the teaching operation. And then I can see the things clearly, what works and what doesn't work, and what things I can change, what things need to be changed now, what things will create some consternation if you change, but they have to be changed anyway. What things I can move here that will have, a domino effect that will become greater than that original movement. And so I set these pieces in motion and let them go. And then you start making corrections along the way. But I am always inserted in the clinical operation. Like, for instance, I worked.
Getting your hands wet. I mean,
that's right.
You have to be
get your
at the
hands
core
dirty.
of the ICU. And when you pick people for an ICU, for example, what are the most salient features that the professional, that the pediatrician, for example, had to, in your opinion, have to perform well in a team so complex as an ICU?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think that
or perhaps let me reframe the question. What they do not have to do, or how they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Be a negative.
Yeah, and I think that's a very way to put it. So I think the simplest answer is I would pick someone who is not me. I am myself already. So I need people who can complement all my deficiencies, and I will try to surround myself with the absolutely highest quality of people I can surround myself with. I cannot tell you how fortunate I have been, to work at Case Western University and Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland, where I had a team and I was able to move pieces around to create a team that was dynamite, and walk away from there and hand that team to Steve Shine, good friend of yours and very close friend of mine, who have done an amazing job and has taken their program to heights that I would not have been able to. And then coming to Duke University, where I walk into a very good team. I mean, exceptional team, incredibly smart people, and come in and realize that there are areas that we need a specific player, and then go out there and bring someone from the outside or find that talent within your own organization, and then enable that person to go to their full potential. So I used to take on projects. I used to say, well, this program is good. It wants to be excellent, and in my opinion, these are the things that I need to do to get there. And I take great joy in that. I also take great joy in establishing, I'm not going to say a legacy, but it is how you or I will be immortal. We're all going to die, me much sooner than you, but all the work that we put into this will outlast us through the bloodlines of the people we trained. So my fellows, my residents, and people who are now leaders in their own programs, and that have learned to take the best of me and avoid the worst of me, and become kind of this amalgamation of all that is good about the people who train them. Yeah.
But
to answer your question,
you have to recognize that when you have really high specialized and highly qualified people in your team, egos start to work. So it must be really challenging to handle this kind of egos where you're working, or many people, many really intelligent people are working together. How do you manage those intelligence or personal intelligence to create a, a teamwork intelligence in a way? I mean, you
Sure.
can have a Barcelona or a Internacional de Porto Alegre with one Messi, but if you have 10 Messis, I'm not sure that they will play so well.
Well, and they certainly will not, because I am not going, for a Messi. Messi has taken many, many years to accept who he is, understand his fragility, and overcome that. Everybody expected him to choke in the last World Cup, and he actually rose to the occasion. He arrived, and but it took him a long time, and the same thing is true in critical care. Um, Brett Furman told me this once, and I'll remember forever, that one of the goals in critical care, one of the goals of an intensivist, is to keep your humility without the need to be constantly humiliated. It is very easy, to
Yeah.
let critical care, go to your head, because in an ICU like ours, we have at Duke University, we have the best outcomes for cardiac critical care in the country. There's no other program right now that has better outcomes than we do. And this is an objective measurement. That's not my opinion. So for every patient that has complex operations, where other centers will have a mortality of 20%, we have a mortality of 5% for stage, stat 5 Norwood operations with complexity. So it's very easy for someone to say, well, we're doing so well because, and that just gets to your head. But then you have to understand that every once in a while, something terrible will happen.
You fail.
In spite of you,
Yeah.
and,
Sooner or later.
sometimes because of you. And if you allow yourself to feel that you are better than you are when times are good, you will want to jump out the 10th floor, when you have a bad day. So for me, and the people in my group, it doesn't matter how good you can be. We are always here. We are very even. We take a good day with pleasure, and we have to shake off a bad day because the next patient needs you just as much. So I'm not looking for people. It stands out if someone starts to become egocentric and think that they are more than who they are. And one way to do this is to lead by example. And this is something that I think is hard for my colleagues in Brazil. It's certainly hard for my mother to understand. My mother is now in her late 80s, and she called me yesterday, and it's 10 o'clock at night here. Sorry, at 10 o'clock at night there, and 8 o'clock at night here. And I'm in my scrubs, and I'm in the hospital. And she said, well, what are you doing? So I'm working. So, well, you're working this morning. I says, yes, I was working this morning, and I'm going to work tonight, and I'm going to work the next day. She says, well, aren't you the chief? And I said, yes, I am. But well, when is that going to stop? When are you going to sleep on your own bed every night? Which is a question my wife asks often as well.
Yeah, I imagine.
And the answer is never. I think as long as I do this, as long as I need to lead, I need to be immersed in the operation. So unlike some of my colleagues around the world, that when you achieve a certain level, you become a full professor or a division chief,
And
you
you
no
stay at the
longer take
office.
call. Yeah, you just kind of, you're just the mastermind. Here, and for me, it is very important for me to be clinically active, to be in the ICU overnight, to be doing procedures, to intubate patients, to put catheters in, to extubate patients, to talk to the families, to turn the knobs in the ECMO machine. And you lead by example. Otherwise, you leave a lot to chance. You just trust that people are going to become the culture that you want it to, the program that you want the program to have. Whereas if you're part of it, you are constantly making small corrections into how this syncytium of life that is a program, becomes. And that, I find that very interesting. I think one day I probably won't, but right now it's funnest job I've ever had.
I mean, you can give the best lecture to a fellow about how is the best way to talk to parents in the ICU, and I'm sure that there are no better teaching class than witnessing a conversation between you, for example, and a parent, and a couple of parents in front of this fellow. I mean, leading by example, it's a way that I have witnessed when I was in Duke with you. Yeah, that might be a really solid example of how to lead. And the other feature of your really rich academic life is writing and editing. How did you develop the love of editing? I mean, I have been writing many papers with you, and I always learn really a lot from you about your the quality of your editing. I mean, I'm always learning when I write your edits, all my manuscripts. But where did it start? I mean, your love for the editing process of academic books like this one.
Well, I mean, it started by reading them and understanding what is a good book and a bad book, for instance, or a good paper and a bad paper, which I didn't know coming into this. And I was very fortunate to have not only Brad Furman, but also David Steinhorn as my mentors. David was my primary research mentor in New York. And he told me a couple of things, one of which that really stuck with me, and that was, you are going to be judged for your entire life on how you write and how you speak. We can't really do much about how you speak, because you're always going to have this accent. He was a very blunt man. He would say, you make mistakes all the time, and you need to get better at that because people will judge you. But your written English is something you control. So you need to become very good at it, because your accent cannot come through when you write. So I used to write a draft of a manuscript, and back then there was no track changes. You would write the paper, print it, give it to your mentor, and he will come back to you with more red ink than not. Exactly. It was like, do this, do that, and then you'll do it again. And then there was multiple iterations of a draft, and if you pay attention, they're giving you clues to things that sound odd. And then you start to read things that are well written and things that are poorly written, and the contrast just becomes very, very interesting. And then I had also the privilege of working with Brad Furman, as I mentioned multiple times. Brad is an extraordinary writer and a very precise editor. And he speaks in short sentences. He writes in short sentences. And when I read the book, the Furman and Zimmerman textbook, something that was striking to me is that the book, it reads like it was written by the same person, every chapter, and the chapters are written by 300 different people. Yeah. And it's the same feeling that you get when you read the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA. Every paper that goes into those journals is heavily edited. I mean, you recently published an editorial in JAMA, and I am certain that your vision for the editorial was significantly changed by the precise writing of a good medical editor. And some people got offended by that and said, well, how dare you change my masterpiece? But the reality is, if you pay attention, it is an incredible journey to just see what they're doing, and it's just remarkable. So I learned critical care with the first edition of the book. I was a fellow in the second edition of the book. In the third edition, I was asked to write a chapter. In the fourth edition, I wrote a few chapters and had billing as a section editor, and the same thing went for the fifth edition. And then in the sixth edition, Brad Furman decided that he wanted to step down as senior editor, and he asked me to take his place. which was the honor of a lifetime.
Yeah.
So that
Was that the
allowed me to-
culmination of anything in your academic life? Did you
I mean,
feel
to me, it
that
was.
way? I mean, I got it. I mean,
Well, actually, Sebastian, I think you know me well enough to know that that's not how I felt. I probably
yeah.
felt, oh my gosh, I fooled everyone, and what have I done? You know, someone is going to come in and figure out that I'm really not who they think I am, and this is terrible. But once you get past that imposter syndrome, you know, you realize that you know, the men who you know, one of the people you most admire professionally is actually choosing you to take on, you know, the next chapter of of their production. And so I worked very hard on that. And you know, the way this works is Jerry Zimmerman and I split the book in half, and we see every single chapter that comes in, and we heavily edit them for, you know, to sound the same, to have the same style. So it's a very heavily edited book. It's a work of love. It takes about 3 years from conception to completion. And as soon as you publish it, you maybe enjoy it for about 2 or 3 or 6 months, and then you start planning the next one. So we are now heavily into planning for the 7th edition, which is going to play out in the next few months.
I mean, how do you feel when you know that this book is being read all around the world? I mean, it is one of those perhaps two big books in our field. I mean, you are leading the way in a way on how fellows are being trained around the globe. What do you feel about that?
I mean, it's obviously a very good feeling. It's something that validates a lot of the hard work that we put into the field, and it's just a way of making a difference. The book is widely read. I am very you know, happy to, you know, this job has given me the opportunity to travel all over the world, and there has not been a place I visited where I don't see a copy of the book in an ICU. Sometimes it's even you know, funny. I went to give a talk in Beijing, and you know, I had my talk and my thumb drive, and then
is it translated in Chinese, Mandarin?
It is not. So Elsevier has not translated this book into any other languages, which is apparently it's a very onerous, very costly process to translate the book, a specialty book, and a specialty book that obviously does not sell a lot because critical care is a small field. So it's not like you're translating Harry Potter. You know, you're translating a book that is going to be bought maybe by, you know, a couple of thousand people. So there's no money for the publisher to embark on something like that. But I remember, you know, trying to change computers and so on, and someone actually handed me a thumb drive, and in the thumb drive that I was saving my talk to, there was a file, and it was a PDF file that said Furman and Zimmerman 6th edition. And I said, well, wait a second. So you have the book in PDF? Said, yeah, here in China we have everything. And I said, well, can I have a copy of that? Because I don't have a PDF copy of the book. And within weeks, you know, some people in China had bootleg copies or pirate copies of our book. So I now use that to distribute to my fellows, you know, if they lose their access or something. So
Alex, it's been a really fun conversation. I'm the last question to you would be, if you could, what would you say to the Alexandre Rotta who was leaving Brazil a few decades ago? What would be your advice to yourself? I mean, you are not the same, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, Sebastian. You know, I would say, you know, marry the right partner because you are going to have to be supported through this whole journey. And I am so fortunate to have Christy in my life because she is an incredible woman that understands what I do, and she's not jealous of medicine. And you met her; she's an extraordinary woman. I would tell myself, to buy Bitcoin in 2013 so that I could then retire early. I would tell myself some of the best advice that was given to me, actually, and this is this I think is actually important. The other one was the Bitcoin part was a joke, but when I was deciding how I was going to try to stay in the United States and try to create this exception, for the immigration services to allow me to not have to go back to Brazil, I consulted a lawyer, and again, I was a fellow at the time. I had no money, and this lawyer was very expensive. Was almost like half a month's salary to my salary to talk to him for an hour. And his advice was this, because I was trying to decide if I was going to stop my training and then go do something in an underserved area to change my visa and be able to stay and then go back and do critical care. And he said, listen, this is my advice to you, and this is why you're paying me this much money. Don't do that. Follow your path and work hard and be the absolute best you can be. And if you do that, you will be able to overcome, the barriers, because someone is going to help you find a way, to push through this. So that's what I did. I worked incredibly hard, incredibly long hours. It was rewarding because I was doing what I loved. So if I could, give myself advice, is do that from the very beginning, and don't question yourself. Just be very deliberate in what you do, because there is a major price to be paid. And the price, Sebastián, is that you get to watch your life being lived in a parallel universe. I see my friends in Brazil doing the things we used to do, and it's a great life they have. And here I am in this very difficult parallel life, but you can never go home. You can never go back. I can't stop what I'm doing and go back to Brazil and try to make it there, because the Brazil I knew, from 30 years ago is not there anymore.
It doesn't
so
exist.
once you depart, once you fork your life, you can never go back. And so that's a heavy price to be paid. And so sometimes, I wonder if the happiest people in the world are not the ones who are, in the small island where they wake up and there's no stress, and they go and they fish and they eat and they plant and they live a modest life, and they never really understand the difficulty of the complexities of the things we do. But I will never know. But all I know is that I really enjoy what I do.
Enjoy the journey.
I can't believe they pay me to do what I do. But it's been an interesting journey. And then, of course, getting to meet people like you, and make friendships as an adult, which is extraordinarily rare. But you find the right people, and you are one of them. So I am so fortunate, and if I were to die today, I would be very happy. Not happy that I was dying, but I would be fulfilled. that my life,
it was clear.
my life would be, what was worthwhile. So, and again, thank you for inviting me to do this.
Becoming the best version of yourself. It's a wonderful advice. Alex, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for tricking me. I thought we were going to talk about bronchiolitis and mechanical ventilation, and this ended up being a very personal talk. So thank you, Sebastián. That is great. Well, thank you so much.